Hey, Karen.
Hey, I'm gonna go pretty soon.
Are you working up a school day all day?
Mike and I are recording our demos this morning.
Yep.
Mandy and I have to work on the CIS forms. I have a meeting at 2, I don't know, most of the day.
Sure.
But I'll be home so we can go to Gerton's.
Sounds good.
You'll want to have Abby up and rolling so she gets her stuff done during the day.
Yep, I agree.
I just was in there, but I mean, I don't know how long your session goes.
It's going to go for an hour. Morning, everyone. It's 8 a.m. We're going to get started. Hopefully you're having a good morning. Today we're going to be taking a look at essay writing, DBQs in particular, and different study techniques that you may want to be thinking about as we start moving towards the AP test like we highlighted yesterday. Our goal is to try to figure out different things that you may be wanting to use at this point to help you out with the writing process. And again, what we're trying to figure out is, do you have content needs? Specifically, are there content issues that you're having with being able to produce proper nouns under pressure in a time limit? Can you cite specific names, dates, facts accurately and efficiently so that you're able to use them in the writing process? Secondarily, do you structurally know how to build out an essay question to make sure that you're satisfying all elements of the rubric so you're maximizing your points, so you're able to get the best score on the AP test that you possibly can? So if your goal is to bypass this course in college, your essay gives you a fighting chance to be able to pull it off. And then finally, do you have a strategy for how you organize all that stuff in a 45-minute window so that your writing looks really good to somebody like me when I start grading that in about a month? So we want to make sure that you are working on all of those different elements and determining what it is that you need to work on to be able to be good. So let me highlight, first of all, what is going on with your daily agenda. Oops, nope, I don't want to do that. So today, obviously, making sure getting your attendance done would be fantastic to keep everything good. But what I want you to be paying attention to is I am strongly recommending that you guys do the timed DBQ that the College Board is offering today at 10 a.m. It'll be recorded. And so if you're unable to make it at the time that is taking place, then writing it some other time today, but under a 45-minute window, planning out and writing your essay to make sure that you are safe and good would be a really good place to be. Doing that twice this week, once on Monday. We had an essay test on Monday that we'll look over today to be able to help you with any questions. Like I mentioned yesterday, we'll be looking over the DBQ from Monday. There was a debrief yesterday. I'll be able to help you out with your writing process. Today, they'll be doing a timed DBQ again. doing a debrief tomorrow. And then this is all getting you guys prepared for the final summit of DBQ that we'll be doing. So you'll be writing an essay at 8 a.m. on Monday in timed conditions like we've done previously. And so we'll want to make sure that once we get to Friday, all your questions are answered. You've got your ideas ready to go. And a week out from the AP test, we should be able to write a really good DBQ. So first things first, if we go to the Facebook page, the YouTube page for the College Board, this was, and I'll put this into the chat right here, the link that they used for the timed DBQ. And what they did is they just provided down here in the resources the essay question that they were going to be using for that day. And then they just set up a timer with a planning process and a walkthrough of what it would be like to actually write out that essay under time constraints. The essay question looked like this. And so what I promised yesterday was if you have any sort of questions or concerns that you want to have addressed as far as how does DBQ work, now that you've had the chance to write the essay on Monday, to hear the debrief on Tuesday, if there are any things that you need to have clarified or questions you need to have answered, this would be the time to be able to take care of that. In particular, what I'd like to highlight for you, though, is notice that they've got in the bullet points right here, the rubric for the DBQ. Thesis statement, contextualization, use 4 documents to support your response. And then what they've done is they've given us a rubric to break down how these should be assessed as far as your point success, where they're telling you to use 4 documents to support your essay. If you only use 2, well, or else if you only summarize 2, that's up to us to do the grading, but this is their standard they're setting for you. So if you need the rubric on AP test day, having that printed out would be good, but also having these bullet points will help you out. If there's any documents that are causing you any sort of problems, we can easily talk about those as well. If there's planning questions that you guys have, you can post them into the chat too. So I'll give you about a minute to be able to jot down any questions you guys might have. Although I watched the review session that they did online, and I thought they did just fine. Of the 2 people who are doing the sessions, I've worked with Mr. Horton before, who is one of the 2 people who is running that. He is a consultant like I am who travels the country teaching other AP teachers. And he's phenomenal at what he does. So the insights that they provided yesterday were right on line with what I'd want you guys to be hearing too. Not seeing any questions in the chat. I'm going to take that as a good sign then that your essays yesterday either went well, or else, heaven forbid, I'm totally cognizant of the fact that there are probably people who are not doing what they need to ramp up for the AP test. That is something with distance learning that distance learning teachers very much get used to. The idea that you're going to have students who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, because with the freedom that you have, sometimes that leads to irresponsibility. For the AP test, keep in mind that the way that this test is created, number one, writing an essay test like this with a time limit is difficult, and not practicing it beforehand is a really dangerous place to be. So refining your skills to get yourself to a good spot is very much where we want to be. This is your timed essay for today. So let me put this also into your chat. And I don't know if this is intentional or if this was just an accident, but for the timed essay that they've provided right here, they've got down here the practice questions and exam documents, but they haven't provided the actual question itself. So I don't know if they're holding that back until the time of the essay writing today at 10. And so I'm not certain what is up with that. But what I do want to highlight for you is the way that you should be thinking about writing these essays. In particular, the technique that we're going to be teaching today is how do you avoid having what is called a document-driven essay. Now, yesterday during the session, the review, Mr. Horton pointed out that your documents obviously are going to be providing some of the structure of your essay. The dilemma that you have is if all you've got inside of your essay is just document 1 says this, document 2 says this, there are huge gaps that are being left out. So in this case of the DBQ that you had from this past Monday, they provided during this time period the topic of the Great Migration during World War I, They have right here the Red Scare that is taking place and the immigrant restrictions that come on in the 1920s. They've got the question of the woman's role inside of society, especially in the period following the work of women inside the factories during World War I. They've got the question of what technology is doing to culture. And then they mention down here, as a result of the Great Depression, the rise of modern art, the blending together of government and private. This is something that is seen as an element that could be also influencing culture. And you're being asked to think through, evaluate the relative importance of causes of cultural change in the United States. The things that aren't being included here that could easily be brought in is discussions about progressivism, World War I, the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, the New Deal, and World War II. And all of those openings are opportunities for outside information to work their way into their essay. So that when you are bringing in the things about the documents and talking about the Great Migration that's happening right here, the Great Migration is a great thing to talk about. You could easily use World War I as a contextualization. When they're talking about the Red Scare right here, you could easily talk about what happened over in Russia in 1917 during World War I that caused tensions about communism inside the United States, or strikes that took place after World War I when there weren't enough factory jobs that were available for workers. You could easily talk about here flappers and jazz and other sorts of cultural changes that are taking place when it comes to women. When it comes to the technologies that you have right here, you could talk about how great these technologies were, but a culture of buying things using debt was something that helped create the conditions of the Great Depression, caused major suffering, caused a feeling inside the country that we should move away from laissez-faire economics to something that had more government involvement. And when we take a look at the New Deal that is described right here, you could easily take the next 6 years from 1939 to 1945 to talk about what World War II did to the culture, Rosie the Riveter, the mass employment that took place, and you could even get into a post-contextualization about the GI Bill or the movement towards suburbs or the 1950s or whatever. The key thing to be thinking about is if you're hyper-focused on the documents, there's so much stuff that they're leaving gaps for, and they're leaving huge openings. So if you've ever watched a football game, the way that a running back operates is the running back doesn't plow into the offensive line over and over again, trying to slam through people who are much bigger than them. Instead, plays are set up to create openings that a running back can run through so that they can then run to the end zone and score a touchdown. Same thing for you guys. There are gaps that are being provided right here that are meant for you to be able to put your essay outside information into, on top of being able to do document analysis. So when I double back here to the essay that they're giving you today, for some reason they have not provided a question for you, but if you take the dates that they have for the documents, 1836, and running up here to the Frederick Douglass speech, the meaning of the 4th of July, and they've done in this DBQ some things that I've never seen them do in DBQs before. They will regularly have here sourcing information to tell you the dates that stuff is taking place. But what I want you to think about is on AP test day, when you take a look down this list, you will notice that they've got names of people that are right here. Hopefully they're ones that you recognize from time. But if I go to meaning of the 4th of July for Frederick Douglass, that speech is delivered in 1852. So what you're doing today for your timed write is going to be a DBQ that goes from something like 1830s to the 1850s and includes things from Charles Finney, Andrew Jackson, the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments, participation in elections, and Frederick Douglass. As you take a look at those documents, then you've got a bookend, beginning and end set of dates that can start giving your brain things to think about as far as where your essay might be heading. When you think about that, then remember what we talked about from your concept outline, the idea of using themes and skills to determine what they might be having you write about. And so if you take a look and a document that has an abolitionist and Indian removal and Seneca Falls and elections and Frederick Douglass, my hope is that that starts creating some thoughts inside your head that this is probably not a foreign policy DBQ. It's probably something that's going to be more cultural, societal, possibly getting into slavery, although that Indian removal document is kind of an odd one to have for a slavery essay. And that can kind of get your juices flowing as far as thinking through what are these documents trying to tell you, but also notice the gaps. There are big gaps that you have inside the documents, both time-wise and topic-wise, that most likely has outside information that you could be using to help yourself out. What I would then, for you guys, think about using is a technique that is called the 6 degrees of separation to help you prepare for how you're going to be doing the writing on your DBQ. The way you do 6 degrees of separation is you take a beginning and an end event inside of a theme and you set them up opposed from one another. And what you do is you walk from one event to the next event to try to link them together to get from point A to point B. And this is a review strategy that's super easy to do. It doesn't require worksheets or other sorts of things. Although I've got one here for you of the Missouri Compromise and how that led to the secession of the Southern states. What I would like you to think about is this. I would like you to take a moment, take out a sheet of notebook paper, and imagine that you're getting an essay question that asks you from 1820 to 1860, explain the reason why compromise failed to hold the country together when sectionalism was threatening to take it apart. We've done this essay repeatedly, but the reason why we're doing this right now is to find out how automatic is that content? How good are you with that? So what I would like you to do is I would like you to think through the list of items right here. And I want you to think about the Missouri Compromise and going from the Missouri Compromise towards the failure of compromise in 1860 and 61, when the South seceded from the North. I'd like you to think, what were the steps that you would put into an essay that you would need to use to explain why that split took place? Take a couple minutes, try to slam that out on your paper and think about doing it quickly, because that's what you'll need to do on test day. Now that you've had about a minute to get started with what you're writing your way through, what I want you to think about is imagine if you were writing about this on the AP test. The mistake that kids will think should belong over here is they'll think that they're supposed to be writing down summaries. So imagine if going from the Missouri Compromise, 1820, you have Missouri and Maine added as free and slave states. And as that is taking place, you've got then a balancing act that's being maintained in the Senate. You've got a dividing line that's being made throughout the Louisiana Purchase. And with that dividing line, you're having then a split that is taking place in existing territory, but we've got some territories that have not been defined yet because they have not been conquered by the United States at that point. When I think through then the reasons why compromise went from being successful to being a failure, one of the things that I think about then is the rise of Andrew Jackson. So I could easily put into the Jackson presidency right here, the nullification crisis. And if I think about the nullification crisis, that was where the tariff of abomination was created. South Carolina played around with the idea that they were not going to pay that tax. And as a result, we came to the brink of a civil war, but thankfully a compromise was created. Now, the thing that was taking place is Andrew Jackson threatened to invade South Carolina, but Henry Clay created a tariff that calmed everybody down. tariff money was still coming in. South Carolina got a lower tariff because of their protest. They threatened nullification and got the federal government to change its behavior. But over here, what I could write down is not just the summary. I need to be thinking about a little kid being in the room asking the question, why? And the question why is very much getting into why is it important to know about the nullification crisis when you're getting into a question about the secession of the South in 1861. And what I can answer the kid is I can tell them that at this moment, you still had enough unity between the North and the South where Henry Clay was able to work out a compromise that was able to hold the country together. But the idea of nullification was being test driven by South Carolina, and they realized that if they threatened secession, they would then be able to get the North to bend to what they wanted them to do. And so it's not good enough just to announce that there was a moment of tension between North and South, because you need to imagine when doing an activity like this, set yourself up with some sort of essay question and think about cause and effect, like it says up here at the top of the page. But think about the idea of cause and effect of what caused the Civil War, what caused a failure of compromise. And regularly in those sorts of essay questions, you'll find some sort of element of like a turning point, or you'll find some sort of element of compare multiple causes. And in my mind, when I run down the list right here, I could talk about the nullification crisis that took place. I could talk about the Texas Revolution. But in particular, in my mind, when I think about this time period, I've done this so often that when I teach this from year to year, kids will ask me, like, what do I enjoy teaching the most? And teaching nowadays is not about me discovering a lot of new stuff in the content. Each year I'll keep reading and I'll keep finding out little tidbits that are new. But I'm kind of at that stage of like a musician who has been playing like their greatest hits for the past 20 years. It doesn't take a lot of work for me to run through again for somebody else what caused the Civil War. For me, the excitement comes from being able to help you guys kind of figure out different tricks or techniques to help lock this stuff in. For me, then, what I'm always building up to is the turning point that happens here is in 1848 to 1850, where there's a transition that happens. Mexican-American War and the acquisition of California throws off the balance of North and South in the Senate. California is added as a free state. Compromise of 1850 still holds the country together. But after that moment, you have things that are taking place like bleeding Kansas and popular sovereignty, the rise of the Republican Party, the Dred Scott case, the caning of Sumner, John Brown, and all of these things are causing the disintegration of the country. Now, the key thing to think about when you're doing this activity is remember on the AP test, you don't need dozens of outside facts. You need 2 outside facts that you can explore that are not related to the documents. You do also want to do the H in happy whenever possible. So when you take a look back at these documents, and this is the reason why I open this up for you today, you'll want to be able to lay out the H or the A or the P or the P for each of these 5 documents, knowing that you only need to do it well for 2 of them. When you do that, then, like if you look at this document right here, 1836, you've got Charles Finney, who's talking about human choice and salvation. This is a preacher in the 1830s. The historical contextualization is the Second Great Awakening. For us, then, we want to be able to have that sort of outside information that we build up through activities like this. But then also we want to have some outside information to be able to slip in here, where when we start talking about this moment, leading to this moment, leading to this moment in 1848, when you have the Seneca Falls Convention, it would be nice to be able to slip into your essay outside pieces that you've cultivated with activities like this, where these are your facts for a given topic. For this specific essay, that's what you have rehearsed. And that's the level we're trying to get you to with your essay writing. The worst feeling in the world is to get an essay question next Friday and you're like, holy cow, I've never thought about that topic ever previously. I've never thought about that question. I am in such trouble. It's kind of like during a concert when I was in choir way back when. We had a choir conductor who told us, if you forget the words, just keep mouthing the word watermelon because it makes it look like you are actually singing when you're not actually singing, but at least it doesn't make you look goofy. We don't want you to have that sort of survival strategy to just survive without like being totally blown up by a test. Instead, that's the reason why before a choir concert, we rehearse like crazy to know our lines. And so the activity that I've got set up for you today then, and I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm assuming that you guys are good with your essay writing. And if you are not, I'm assuming that you are going to be seeking out help from me so that I can help you out. But let me give you this. This is a Google document that will bring you to this document right here. These are your learning objectives by theme. So this is lifted from the College Board's concept outline, and these are themes that run throughout the course. And we're going to be playing around then for the rest of the time that we have today to play around with the ideas of doing 6 degrees of separation. We're going to be playing around with how do you build out essay questions for yourself, because you got a DBQ organizer yesterday that allows you to play around with actual DBQs. This is the way that you do your review to find out what content areas are you having problems with. If you look down this list and you find a content area where you're like, I have no idea what this thing means, obviously you're in a danger zone that needs to be helped out. Now, remember, you're doing an essay on periods 3 through 7. That doesn't mean ignoring periods 1, 2, 8, and 9 is totally great, because remember, you can do pre-contextualization and post-contextualization when it comes to topics. So if you take a look at what you've got going on here, the themes for the course are laid out. Like, one of your themes is America and national identity. What does it mean to be an American, revolving around the ideas of concepts of citizenship, constitutionalism, foreign policy, assimilation, and so on. One of the themes that they want to be able to talk about in essay form is they want to be able to explain how ideas about democracy, freedom, and individualism found expression in our cultural values, political institutions, and American identity. And so what you could do is, if you think about this question, starting with period 3 and working our way towards period 5, you could easily build up an essay question to ask this thing. What happened over this time? To what extent did Americans' idea of freedom, equality, and democracy develop and change from the American Revolution to the Civil War? You could then easily take this model of the 6 degrees of separation. Your beginning point would be the American Revolution, and I'm assuming you'd use the Declaration of Independence to talk about our ideas of independence, democracy, and so on. Civil War would be your end date, and you could easily be putting into there things like the Emancipation Proclamation or whatever. But try to run that out. So take a sheet of notebook paper, and what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take a different spin on the one that we saw going right here, Missouri Compromise to the secession of the Southern states. This was asking why the country split. This question is asking you, to what extent did Americans' idea about American values of democracy, independence, and so on, to what extent did that change from here to here? You're looking to provide specific facts in between the American Revolution and the Civil War that could be seen as turning points, that were seen as possible changes in our interpretation. You may also want to think about the way that things stayed the same, that they did not change over that time period. And when we think about things like racism and whatever, you guys are fully aware that Reconstruction did not fully address the discrepancies that we saw going on. Women are also not going to see a full addressing of the dilemmas that they're having as well, but we do see changes taking place. So take about a minute, see what you can do brainstorming wise between the American Revolution and the Civil War, analyzing what changes took place in our interpretation of democracy, independence, and freedom. Take about 30 more seconds to try this on your own. Now, what I need to highlight for you is when you're doing your essays, each person can use different facts the way that they want to. And so the step that you should be noticing is you've got in this list a whole bunch of items that you could slip into this worksheet if you would like to. The worksheet is not the key. It's not the facts themselves that are essential. You don't have to use the second great awakening in the topic that I laid out for you if you have better evidence that you would like to use. Your key is that little kid question of why. And it was one of my favorite things about being a dad who was also a teacher, because both my kids would ask the most phenomenal questions. And we'd be driving around, and after taking a day to teach about like complex economic history, I'd have my kids asking questions about like why the sky is blue and why zebras have stripes and whatever. And it's that why piece that is key. So if you claim that the second great awakening is essential for the way that we changed our thinking about democracy and freedom and independence, you might be right. Just name dropping the second great awakening, though, doesn't get you there. And what I want you to notice how many elements of the rubric says that you are not going to earn a point for just a phrase or a reference that you just name drop in your essay. It's up to you to analytically tie all the strings together to explain to the reader why you believe that this event should be seen as a turning point for how we view democracy and independence and freedom inside the United States. So when I look at this list right here, I could easily get into the discussion of the loose versus strict constructionism during the Washington presidency, especially when it came to the Bank of the United States, because throughout the early 1800s, we start to accept the Hamilton vision of what the government should be doing when it comes to regulation of business and the economy. But then when we get to Andrew Jackson's time period, there's a rejection of like the elites on the East Coast. There's this feeling that they went too far. Bank of the United States is seen as unconstitutional. We see the rise of the Whigs versus the Democrats that you could use to take a look at how we shifted away from the original debate of loose versus strict constructionism. And instead, we're taking a look at like Clay's American system battling against Andrew Jackson, and the tensions that are being created about manifest destiny out west are causing questions about should we be more leaning towards the South or the North with our economic and political structures. There's tons of facts I could be using. What I would highlight, though, is from the beginning to the end, I should have a vision in my mind about where I'm going. And this is where the planning for your essays really become important, where if you start writing your essay and you're, instead of like planning things out, you instead are hoping that the documents will pull you together because you're going to summarize document one, you're going to summarize document two. You'll notice that with the gaps that are inside the documents themselves, and I'll flash back to the DBQ on Monday, if your DBQ turned into this, we had a great migration during World War I of African Americans moving north. And then in document two, we became afraid of immigrants. And then in document three, we weren't certain what women's roles in society were. And then in document four, we had brand new inventions. And then in document five, we used the WPA to fix the Great Depression. Cool, you just summarized all the documents. You have not ATFQ'd. But even if you're like, the Great Migration really changed things because African Americans moved up north. Cool. Is that the main reason why you see cultural change taking place in the United States? Or is this a main reason why you're seeing the nature of American culture change? And in my mind, when I think about this essay question, the major causes of cultural change that we see from 1914 to 1945, think about where we start and think about where we end up. In 1914, we're in the progressive era. In World War I, and in the 1920s, we have conservative Republicans reject both. They reject involvement in the world, and we go to isolationism. They reject progressivism. We move towards laissez-faire economics. And during the time period before we moved into World War I, we had a society that was still sectionally based, but we now have, as a result of World War I, African Americans moving into the North, and they do the same during World War II. We have women moving into the factories in World War I and World War II. We have tons of technological change. We have fear of radicalism, but if you take document 2 and document 5 together, this fear of radicalism is used by some people to attack the Great Depression. But for most Americans, they're going to argue the Great Depression isn't radical. It's just a new deal for how our society is going to be different as far as how our government and our society and our foreign policy is going to be operating from that time forward. That bigger vision then that you have is going to help you out when doing these sorts of activities. Because when I think about this question right here, there's a solid bet that when you guys were given this job to do, you might have just been scanning through here and going, all right, what factors am I going to use? Think first about what you're trying to say. From the American Revolution to the Civil War, in my mind, there was quite a bit of transition that happened in our vision of democracy and freedom and independence from the American Revolution forward to the Civil War. In particular, I would want to focus on things like the Gettysburg Address, the Emancipation Proclamation, and his second inaugural address, where for Abraham Lincoln, he makes the argument that the founding fathers are being interpreted too narrowly, and that democracy really is supposed to be more expansive for African Americans. Andrew Jackson already made that argument when it came to the question of the common man in elections with democracy, and so it became the era of the common man. And if you look at your documents for your essay today, you have your Declaration of Sentiments in 1848. Women are protesting during the Second Great Awakening, claiming that they too should have rights, and they've now linked with the abolitionist movement to try to get that for themselves. When I think about it from that perspective, then I could find events that will help me fit that narrative. And so it's not about the idea of spiking the football. So if you think about your rubric, you're being asked to include 2 outside pieces of information. I'm seeing some of you guys include 6. And some of you guys are doing that where you're like, I'm going to pump in all these outside facts. I'm not going to actually tie it together with my thesis effectively. I'm just going to give you another fact because that's easier than actually doing the little kid why, but that's not effective writing. You've got a time limit. So think about choosing events, outside information that would help you the best, and have a plan when you're writing. So when you take a look at these themes, like the next one, explain how interpretations of the Constitution and debates over rights, liberties, and definitions of citizenship have affected American values, politics, and society. This could easily be used to craft your essay question. Your essay questions are going to be coming from this big concept that they're laying out to you. You should know how to be able to discuss. If you look at this question, you're like, I do not know how interpretation of the Constitution and debates over these things have changed over time. You have to work on that. And this is where study grouping would be a really brilliant plan coming up soon. But you'll notice that I've got broken down for you big ideas that I think factually could be helpful. And these were drawn from your concept outline. As we think about then the different types of questions you have some dealing with foreign policy. You have some getting into the question of social, ethnic, racial, regional divisions and how these groups have interacted with one another. It would be wise for you to look down these lists and figure out, are there any things that you see here content-wise that you cannot handle on an essay? Like if you look at the Know Nothing Party and you literally know nothing about the Know Nothings, you are in a dangerous spot, but you've got a week to be able to fix that up. The next step, though, that I want you to think through is each of your essay questions is going to be aligned with a theme. So like this theme is focusing on how different social and political groups have influenced society and government. as well as how political beliefs and institutions have changed over time. If any of these themes look difficult for you, you need to rehearse them before you take your test next week. Now, if you don't, I'm most likely not going to catch you except for during our essay that we do on Friday. So on Friday, your essay question will be rooted in one of the themes that's right here. And very quickly, it's going to become obvious when I grade your writing if you've thought through these ideas before. Because for the kids who haven't thought through this stuff, who haven't really done a lot of rehearsal, this is something where your essays will then expose you, because you're going to be so focused on the documents that your essay will not have a cohesive argument to it, because you'll be throwing in random facts because it's your roughest of rough drafts. Our goal, though, with your writing is to have your essay this Friday and next Friday for your actual AP test be a rough draft in name only, but have it have a really coherent thread that runs throughout the essay itself. This activity that you see right here is totally built for teammates. And so this is something where you guys using this electronically to be able to share with one another online, either in Facebook or Google or whatever, running through these lists and thinking through how would you answer the question about how our labor systems have changed? How did our market private enterprise systems develop and change over time? These sorts of elements that you see right here, this is where all of your essay questions will come from. We don't know which one of these will be pegged. And so the trick at this point is to become good with your rehearsal to be able to handle any of these things. My boy right now is playing trombone in middle school. His band director is wrestling with the fact that he knows when middle school kids get sent home with their instruments, and some of you guys are band and orchestra kids, many of you guys recognize that when you were in middle school, if you were playing an instrument, your instrument would gather dust unless somebody was forcing you to actually play your instrument, unless you're a really special kid who liked playing your instrument. My boy doesn't. And so with his trombone, it gathers dust, but then when his conductor checks in with him, he cannot play with the fluency that he needs to. It all becomes apparent how much he's prepared when he's asked to play in public under pressure. That's what your essays are meant to do to you guys. So as you scan down this list, what I would encourage you to think about is if you need to bring me into any of these different questions, if there's any of these that you look at, you're like, I have no clue what I'm doing, just like we did with the DBQ activity yesterday, just like we've done with all the other activities, I am available to be your resource to be able to help you out. So let me bring it back full circle then, because this resource that I have right here, we would oftentimes use this in class as a warm-up activity to essentially do 6 degrees of separation when it comes to the question of analyze the causes of internal migration. We would just try to come up with a question that would take us from point A to point B, like explain the reason why Americans moved internally from the East Coast into the Western territories during this time period and the conflicts that they encountered, and then had kids just run through, here are the facts that I would use, here's how I'd link them together to get from point A to point B. And the key is to move from one point to another. You can't just summarize the event. You need to explain, why is this an important thing to know about to be able to answer the question that we've laid out at the beginning. I would encourage you guys then today at 10 a.m., or else if you're busy at 10 a.m. to watch the recording, try doing the timed essay that they're giving on the AP Classroom Facebook page. I've already given you guys the link for that document going on right here with your chat. Right here. I would encourage you to do that in a timed environment. Try to write it in the way that they're specifying. Tomorrow will then be the review. But what I'll be doing is I'll be taking time tomorrow to answer any questions you guys have about your writing with the DBQ that they're posing to you. Friday then is your timed write. It is a summative 8 a.m. So please make sure you don't oversleep or have other sorts of problems going on. Make sure that you're there, because this will go into your testing category. And we want to see improvement. So we're looking to see where were you previously and where are your essays going now. And so you've got a couple days to be able to answer any sort of question. So if you know that an essay test on Friday is dangerous, make sure you let me in or work on the things that could help you to make that into a better situation. At this point, then, I'm going to watch the chat until you guys drift off, but I have nothing else for you guys this morning other than we are 1 week away from the AP test. You've got a lot of time to work with, but it is important for you to figure out what it is that you are lacking at this time, because cleaning up any of those gaps in your knowledge, problem areas, vastly improves your ability to score well on the AP rubric that you've got going on next week. But look at your rubric sometime between now and tomorrow. Figure out, are there any skills? Thesis, contextualization, outside information, HIP or HAPPY, whichever one you like to use. Outside information used inside your essay, complexity. Make sure you get those questions answered so that you are 1 week away from the AP test writing really good DBQs. Because then after that point, all we're really doing is filling in content gaps to make sure that we use that writing framework that you've built up to be able to insert whatever evidence we need to be able to write well. Thanks for joining me this morning. I hope you guys have a great day, and let me know if there's anything you need.